Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a moment to provide a trigger and content warning. On Smart Talks, we often discuss sensitive and potentially distressing topics, including sexual violence, trauma, and abuse. We understand that these conversations can be challenging and may bring up difficult emotions for some of our listeners. Our full content warning pertaining to today's episode is in the show notes. If at any point in time during this episode you feel overwhelmed, we encourage you to take care of yourself, whether that means pausing the episode, seeking support from a trusted person, or accessing resources. Your well-being is our priority. If you or someone you know needs help, you can visit elizabethsmartfoundation.org for a list of resources or contact the National Sexual Assault Hotline at 1-800-656-HOPE. Thank you for joining us today. Now let's begin. Today we have with us Jessica Willis Fisher, a singer, songwriter, author, and true advocate for healing and resilience. Jessica's story is one of unimaginable courage. Raised in a tightly controlled religious environment, she was a part of a family band, the Willis clan, that rose to fame with a wholesome family image. Yet, behind the scenes, Jessica faced years of abuse and control from her father, who was a dominating figure in nearly every aspect of her life. Her escape from this environment at age 24 set her on a powerful journey of healing, therapy, understanding, and ultimately justice. Now living in Nashville with her husband, Sean, Jessica is using her voice to share her story and advocate for others, inspiring hope and resilience through her writing and music. Her journey reminds us all that even in the face of unimaginable adversity, it's still possible to find strength, reclaim your voice, and build a life of freedom and purpose. We're truly grateful to have her here today to share her story, share a little bit of her passions, tell us what's next, and if we're lucky, we'll get to hear her sing.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Smart Talks. We are very excited to be here with Jess today. And just to kick off this episode, we usually like to ask a few icebreaker kind of rapid fire questions. So starting off, do you prefer reading or writing?
I can't choose both. I go through seasons. I think right now I'm in a writing season. I better be. I'm working on a novel. So writing right now.
That's exciting. That's amazing. That is pretty exciting. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Okay, would you prefer a vacation somewhere else or a staycation at home?
Trick answer, travel. So vacation, but less of the relaxed vacation and more of the, I kind of need a vacation when I get home because it's all adventure mode.
I love that. That's really fun.
I've learned this about myself and my husband and I together.
And do you prefer salty or sweet?
Ooh, cheesy? I'd probably salty. Like, I will take the bread and cheese over the like chocolate and sugar, I have found. So
fun.
Yeah, salty, I guess.
Okay, so this last one we have to ask you, it's not an either or, but as a musician and artist yourself, what's your like favorite go-to song to like get you pumped up and excited?
Ooh, well, okay, so I do love music, and there's a song for every feeling, every situation. As far as like pumping myself up, I specifically have gotten in a habit where, weirdly enough, I don't always like being out in front of people and on stage. Like, that's not the part that really feeds my soul. Like, the lights, that can be overwhelming. So on a day where I'm like, I'm just a human that doesn't really want to like perform, I have two songs that will help me get more like pumped up, and it's The Middle by Jimmy Eat World.
That's a good one.
And then if I need to, I'll follow it up with All Star. And just by the time those two songs are done, I'm like ready to go do a show. And I'm also less worried about what other people think, so I'm feeling comfortable.
That's great. Those are fun.
That's good.
Those are fun songs.
Those are great songs.
That's
Thanks
my
for
little
sharing.
behind the scenes.
Yeah.
I don't know why, they do what they need to do.
Yeah.
So
I love it. They work their magic.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. Okay, fun.
Well, diving right in, can you share with us a little bit about your life, like your childhood, what it was like growing up?
Yeah, so I'm the oldest of 12 kids, and I was born on the south side of Chicago, and the first like 8 to 9 years of my life were kind of one way, and then there was a lot of change. And initially, my dad worked a 9-to-5 job. My mom had studied teaching, and she taught us in the home. We were homeschooled. My grandpa was a pastor, and played with all of my little siblings that came along, and that was our life. But then long story short, my family came into some money, and then we moved to Tennessee, and then, our home changed. We did a lot of music and dance and horseback riding, and there were like 4 years like that. And then a lot of change again. That house burned down. My dad's business changed, and then we kind of entered this phase of being a family band. And so that was kind of a level of publicity, and the story kind of changed around us. By then we had 10, 11, 12 kids, and we were doing TV. And so there was kind of this whole big chapter, the Willis clan chapter. And then that goes all the way up to my early 20s. And although the outer version of the family band and everything looked wholesome and happy, there was so much dark stuff that had been there the whole time, my whole life. And that really came to the surface at that time. And so I got out of my family's home, I got into therapy, and kind of all the family drama came out. My dad was really abusive, and that became known, and there was an investigation. And luckily, as hard as it was, luckily he is in prison. And so I'm in the newest chapter of my life. When I turned 30, I put out a book. I put out an album of original music, and we're making more music, writing more things, and just, learning to integrate all of the experiences that I was carrying around and wasn't really able to voice during that upbringing. And in many ways, although I was an adult, there was so much catch up to do. It really felt like it was still my childhood somehow ended up going into my early 20s because I was stuck in that place. So it's kind of a lot packed into just kind of a summation of the story. So
you've described your childhood a little bit, and we know a little bit about your story, and you've shared with us, and we've read. But for everyone else listening who doesn't know about that, you described your childhood as highly religious and kind of controlling environment. Can you talk a little bit about that part of growing up?
Sure. I'm still learning and sorting through many things. I think a lot of my further healing and processing is still making sense of how much our religious system and belief system really was. Is it chicken or egg? Did we end up in that situation because of what we were taught, what we believed, or is that an anomaly? And I think there's a lot of systematic connections, actually. If you're raising young children, female children, to believe that they are lesser than and that their voices don't matter and that they are to submit without question and things like that, you're creating an environment in which, even if these things aren't guaranteed to happen, if they happen, it's going to be really hard to, get support, get healing, have the truth be heard, and all of those things. And so, I dearly love my family, my extended family, and a lot of the community that I grew up in, I think, is full of wonderful people. I also don't believe that some of the really most common problems are just a bad apple problem. It does feel again, like I said, there's a connection between some of the things that you're teaching or some of the things that you believe, and then some of the ways that you act or the things that you kind of live with and normalize. So, I'm not out here to, we were raised Christian. My grandpa was a Baptist pastor, and their faith was something that they were very open about. There's a very strong evangelical streak, and when you're little, well, just for my perspective, these are my caretakers. These are the people that I love and look up to, and they're telling me things about, how the way the world works and what my place is in it and place in the family. And there was death early on, the money that I mentioned earlier that came to my family was as a result of a wrongful death suit and situation. And so I was only about 3.5 years old when some of my relatives died. And so just even making sense of what do we do when we encounter death, and how do we make sense of that? And, being told, oh, you'll see them again, and, see them in heaven, and don't worry, this is how that all makes sense, and how you can still feel safe in the world while seeing hard things. And so, those are some things that I've been reflecting on even lately, because as your beliefs change, like you're going back to some of your earliest memories and things that you were making sense of and having to kind of renegotiate that.
Yeah. So I have a question, and
Sure.
it's not meant to be offensive at all. I mean, I was raised Mormon, very strict, very Christian, never miss a Sunday school. Then I was kidnapped. During my abduction, my captors used religion to like manipulate me and to hurt me, and that's how they justified everything they did. So do you feel, as I hear you speak about your experiences and growing up, I'm curious to know your thoughts or your opinion. Do you feel like it was the same for you, that religion was used as a tool to control and manipulate you, or make you an easier victim? Or
I think the short answer is yes. Like, I do feel those things. I think even just on the surface, there's a lot of differences with our stories. It does totally resonate, though, to say, religion was used to justify some of the worst things that were like done to me, or the things that were happening around me. And, what do we do with that? Because there's lots, anything that's like powerful or even beautiful, like these are powerful things that can be used to hurt people, whatever sort of system that we come in. And, so I don't want to reject, for example, music. The environment or the power of music was wrapped up in those abusive, toxic events and things. And I've reclaimed that to where, let's separate out. This is an unhealthy way of doing that for me. That's unhealthy for me. Here's a healthier way. Religion has been, I'm definitely on a road of trying to, parse out, like, we're not gonna be on board with anyone using religion. I'm not gonna use religion to try to like hurt someone, hurt their body, like hurt their mind, and tell, to justify crimes. Like that's one bar, but also there's a lot more questions. So I do find, I don't want to be overly harsh, and be too focused on my own hurt to not be able to hold space for other people's experiences, because there's so many people who I think their faith is like one of the dearest things to them, or what got them through a hard time. I also feel drawn to the unique challenge of trying to articulate the experience of when that isn't your experience of religion. For someone who's only had positive, like, it's kind of like thinking of their father and saying, I couldn't imagine, like, my father, I'm so close to my father, I love my father, this is great. It's like, okay, well, that's not my experience. And so all those associations are different. And there's a lot of father analogy in Christianity, and so it's like, there's a lot of overlap when it's family, when it's religion, when it's, it's those close, trusted relationships that, like, that's a difference in our stories, where my experiences were tied in with those sorts of systems. And there's unique challenges when that's the environment that happens in, if that makes sense.
Totally.
Absolutely.
So do you feel like there was a moment in time where you realized what was happening was wrong, or was there like an aha moment, or you're just like, I'm not doing this anymore, or I'm not okay with this pain anymore?
There were many different moments, and I think they were based on, the developmental places that I was at.
Like as you were progressing.
Yeah, I mean, I can reach back some of my earliest memories. I would now say, that's an abusive scenario, but I did not have that language then. It was like, Dad's touching me in a place I don't have a name for.
Yeah.
I wasn't in pain. I wasn't like, I gotta tell someone. So it was like, what was that?
You were
I was
talking
gonna, like,
about
go back a
not
little bit.
having, in terms of development and progressing.
Yeah, so some of my earliest memories, they were confusing, but they weren't painful. I wasn't labeling them as traumatic in the moment. Flash forward, there were different acts that, of course, were also abusive, but they were overwhelming in the moment. And I, had the vocabulary to say I was dissociating, I was in a, trauma overwhelm, all these things. But on the flip side, all the way until the day that I left, right before I turned 24, I was basically 24. And the things that were normalized were just so crazy, because I look at them now and I go, I almost can't even believe that was my
Life.
Accepted reality, that I stayed even for 1 second, but, there was a long standing tradition of like violent punishment, even in, what I think are very well-meaning, kind people that are okay with and think that God, very, very passionately believe that God is commanding them to discipline physically their children. And then you fast forward that logic and stretch it kind of to its most toxic, and you end up with a father who has been abusive in every other way, sexually abusive, all these things, taking off his belt, feeling justified to like spank his adult daughter who will not submit to him. And so, that was even a day where it felt like the greatest rebellion to just say that's not going to happen again.
Yeah.
In a crying, there was like no door slamming. Like sometimes I watch like a teen movie that I wouldn't have been allowed to watch, and I just laugh so hard because I'm like, the amount of submission that was required and the amount of rebellion that was cracked down on was just so extreme. It was so one direction. And so the biggest defiance of just like, I basically had to leave under the banner of, I'm the one who's wrong, I'm the one who's kind of getting kicked out, like my dad said to me on that day, he said to like the family, like, when Jess messes up her life and comes crawling back, we'll forgive you, and it's like the reality shift of just months later, him being taken to jail is like, okay, which way's up, which way's down?
And like shifting your whole reality and everything that you learned.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm so curious. I mean, was your mother aware of what was going on the whole time? I mean, she must have supported him in like being as strict as he was, but was she aware of the extent of the abuse? That's
a really tough one. I think it's a lot of people have that question. I have had that question. I feel like a couple things. One, I've had my mom's support now for a while in like telling my story and everything. And similarly to how for me there was not like one moment of realization, I think that, for example, just the word no, like what did your mom know, or what does any of us know? We have different levels of like knowing. Yeah. So if you think of like a court of law, you can say you believe something or say you experience something, but like where's the proof? And so from what I understand, my mom did not have any, she never witnessed any sexual abuse. She went through abuse herself. She knew he was abusive. She stayed many years. He also had escalated his behavior. He was not doing what he did in year 20, in year 1. And so those are all, I think, mitigating circumstances, and both things can be true. Like my mom really let me down and all of us down. She also let herself down, and she came up in a system where she was told that she deserved basically everything that happened to her and that it was her fault. And so, I think there's room for being vulnerable and taking responsibility, because I also got to a point where I was an adult and I wish that I look back and go, I would hope that everyone would wish that they would have the tools to be able to stand up for themselves, and because you can't really stand up for others well if you can't do it for yourself, or especially in this sort of circumstance. And so I was letting things happen to me, and therefore kind of other things were happening on my watch. I was still one of the kids, but I also was an adult. And so anyway, when I look at my mom and other like domestic abuse survivors and different people, there's a lot of empathy that I have.
Yeah.
Learning more just about domestic violence in general helped me understand that there was not some issue that like, what was wrong with my mom that she didn't make like better decisions or have better tools.
Yeah.
It was like, lots of people, whether it's being gaslit, whether, there's certain words that are starting to like float around, narcissism and all of this, but when you have like the most toxic, crazy version of that and you just adjust to it and you try to, you're in survival mode. And, I do want to look back and know that I have the tools now to make better decisions than I made or than my parents made and things like that, because these things are so cyclical. And if we don't figure out we can be well-meaning, we can have common sense, we can, and we can still fall into these really negative patterns that let these things go on.
And familial abuse specifically is rife with this. Like you talked about the cycles of that and how that goes on for sometimes generations. And it is that question that we sometimes ask, like, why was the mother who was being abused, why didn't she leave? And like you said, there are so many different reasons why, and it's not as simple as that one choice. Oftentimes she thinks that she might be protecting her children by taking the brunt of the abuse, or she's not aware of all of the abuse or to the extent that it's happening. Or maybe there's financial abuse that's also happening on top of that, right? Not being able to go, or not having a safety net, and especially growing up in a community where it's tied to religion. I think that's difficult as well, because you have this support system that is maintained through religion, right? And it is dependent on religion too. So if you leave, you're leaving all of that. You're leaving the only support system that the way that the world works according to your beliefs, right? Your friends, your family, all those things. So it's so difficult and complicated. And you mentioned two things I want to touch on, like normalizing it. When you grow up in it, that is your normal. That's what normal life is to you. And you often don't know, you don't have anything to compare it to outside of that. So I think it's not shocking to me to hear that it wasn't this like one moment that you were like, I know that this is wrong. Like, this is wrong. And I have words for it now today. And this is what happened. Because I think it's, again, shifting your whole perception of what life is and what normal is. But then the other thing that you said is when you were talking about your mom and yourself, like letting these things happen to you. I think it's so hard when we go through things like that. But I just want to mention, I think it's not letting those things happen to you. You were surviving. Like, that's what you were doing. You were surviving in this terrible situation and scenario. You chose to survive and to overcome that.
And a lot of people don't. That's where I feel like that, I'll just use common sense, or like I'll just apply logic to it and figure out, this is what this person should have done, or this. And it's like, that is not at all. When you feel like you are about to die and your brain switches over to survival mode, out goes your prefrontal cortex. Like, we're not even, so it doesn't even really work to sit and be like, well, let me think this through. Like, I don't know, think about someone's running at you with a machete. How fast can you get inside your car? It's going to be double as long as normal. Like, just like when our hands start to fumbling, like that is the level of, like nerves that we have going on in our body. And to do that for like 20 years, it's a lot to unpack.
And we've talked about this before, and we're good friends with this doctor she's amazing. She's done all this research on just kind of our instinctual reactions. So fight, flight, freeze. But then there's this fourth one, appease, and it's basically
fawn, appease. Same
It's
thing.
Basically just going into survival mode and doing whatever it is you have to do to survive. So if that means, when people look at me, they say, oh, well, your captor brought you out in public and you were walking down the street and there are other people there. Why didn't you just scream? Why didn't you just yell? But in my mind, I was like, I'm doing what I have to do to survive.
Yes.
I didn't think about how it looked from the outside. I was just thinking of, how am I going to survive?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if something is like factually true or what's possible or what the likelihood is it's like, what would you chance that person is going to slit your throat, or that person is going to follow through on whatever threat it is they said. And if you also really are invested in this idea that that person is so powerful and don't have power, like whether it's I won't be believed or it's I'm not strong enough to fight or whatever it is. I don't think that the fun or what was the term you used? Appease. Yeah. Yes, I think we're talking about the same thing.
Yep.
It's not just gendered, but for females and for children.
Yeah.
So I would say female children, like that's just really the go-to. Yeah. I think more.
Like the default.
My jaw always drops when I meet someone who's like, and at 12 years old, I got out of that situation, or 16, and I'm just like, wow. I'm just stunned. And we kind of pick apart the different things in our upbringings or our personalities or the events that like helped them maybe stand, and you know, lots of times, lots of challenges follow in that way as well. But I think that, yes, talking about, you know, it's not just fight or flight, there's fawn. And actually there's another one that I was hearing recently, but I'm so fascinated by whether it be the neuroscience or the, you know, just looking further into these patterns. And I understand that a couple things. One, if you're trying to get out of a situation that is dangerous or is, you know, chronically abusive, getting out can be the most dangerous part.
Absolutely.
And
definitely.
Everything got way more dangerous and bad for me when I was trying to get out. Now, I always would urge someone like to get out, to ask for help. But yes, you're running the risk that, did that person you tell believe you? Are they going to help? Are they part of the problem? Who to trust? Like all those things. I would still say it's worth trying, but also like eyes wide open. It gets dangerous. It's really hard. Mm-hmm. I don't think it really serves anyone to be like, well, just speak up and everything's going to be great. But when we get
and
to
then the abuse is over.
Right.
Yeah.
Welcome to the rest of your life trying to make sense of this, you know, like it's more of
it's
the
a
reality.
lot of work.
Yeah. And you got to just hope that more and more we can be a society that kind of understands this and doesn't misunderstand it, isn't asking people silly questions like, why didn't you leave? Why didn't, you know, because that just highlights what you don't understand about the situation. Mm-hmm. And it's not survivor's job to go out and, like, we're trying to learn so we can continue to survive mm-hmm. and hopefully thrive. And, you know, if someone is in a safe enough place and they make the decision to try to share their story and make some meaning out of their story, I think it's very valuable to hear those patterns emerge, hear, you know, because the people that have not experienced these things really struggle to understand. I couldn't possibly understand what that's like, and if we can try to step into that space and articulate it, I think there's a lot of value there. But it takes a toll. It's really hard. Who wants to hear these stories? You know, I'm not trying to ruin anyone's day, but
I mean, I would actually argue with you on that because true crime is having a boom right now, unlike any other, whether it's responsibly told or not. That and ethically told, that is a different argument and conversation to be had. But
we're not on different sides of this argument. We're on the same side of this argument because I think that, you know, drama, shocking things will always kind of have a stickiness to our brain because we're trying to learn things like our survival things. It's is there a lion? Do I need to run from it? Part of our brain that is always going to be like, what's the danger? What is it? But if those things are told sensationally or at a distance where you just walk away going, that person was so stupid, or do you know what I mean? It actually can do harm and misinform us about how these things happen. And I think in general, whether it be whatever format it is, I tend to really like podcasts. I like talking to people. I like sharing stories. I like listening. I like learning. I like that it's longer form. Social media, different things. If it's not done with nuance and it's not done with context, it can end up doing more harm than good. And are we re-victimizing people?
Yeah.
Or, you know, are people having to get through the trauma of the press, you know, or the trolls of the internet or something? And that's just, I feel very lucky in that there was a public element to my family story. We were public before, and then when this happened, it, you know, I remember getting the call and saying, like, your dad's been arrested, you probably got a few hours and it's going to be all over the TV. And like, if every channel wasn't playing it, it didn't matter. It was on TV, and it felt like at this point, anyone in the world could have an opinion, could have heard about this, could hear the wrong information, it's just the cat is out of the bag, and this is an absolute nightmare because it's my real life and I'm trying to handle it, and where's my family and what's going on, and now anyone can kind of weigh in, and it's just gonna be this crazy snowball. On the other side, like, because there was a public nature, could have played a part, not necessarily this is not a dig at any of the agents or anything, but I think it was taken seriously because, it's kind of like a C-list celebrity, the C-list celebrity family. Like, if this is real, we got to handle this in a certain way because there will be press, there will be all those things.
You mean because there was already kind of a light shining on your family a little bit, and
it was going to be sensational. It was going to be a scandal. It was going to be something. It was more newsworthy, and that's terrible because when these things happen to anyone, it needs to be stopped. It needs to be handled well, I feel like in some ways, there's been challenges, but there's also been a lot of support. A lot of people felt a lot of positive things towards my family, and have wished us and me well, and I don't feel like I have been attacked necessarily by any of the media or anything like that. I just don't really like cameras much, but like when there's a purpose and we're having a real conversation and we're trying to do good in the world, like, I'm all about it. I don't really want to go back to the place of like putting on a show when it's unhealthy to begin with, but anyway, the whole true crime thing, like, it's interesting.
So kind of on that vein, now that we're talking about this, what made you want to tell your story? You talked about, and I want to talk about your book and your album, but what was that deciding factor for you that made you say, like, oh yeah, maybe this has been covered by the media a little bit, but it's important that you hear from me and my perspective?
Yeah, so, okay, we are kind of follow-up to that vein. I didn't really have the choice for our family to be on TV, the choice for us to have this public band and everything. I would describe it as not really of our own volition. I mean, there was no time at which I talked to my brother and my sister and, like, either as individuals or as a group, we're like, let's make a band. It was like, Dad had this vision for us. And, at first it was like, this is your school assignment, like, or it was, this is a fun thing we're going to do as a family. It was very led by our parents and my dad in particular. And when needed, it just became, this is God's will, with the threat of whether it was violence or, ostracization within the family, or when the end times comes, you can't come in the bunker. Like, it got really weird, but that was that approach. And anyway, to your point though, we were in the public eye, not of our choice, but that's where we were, including TV and everything. And I got to where I kind of popped my head up after 3-4 years of intense trauma therapy, and I had been writing about my experience and having conversations with my family and all sorts of different things that were for me or were individual or were private or, my real life. And it was actually kind of, one way of thinking of it was I knew I wanted to come back and do that kind of reclaiming of music. It was like I was the lead singer. I wrote a lot of songs. So it was this weird thing of, we used the analogy of like, my voice has been stolen or something. But it was quite literal for me, right? And then there was a story that I've told for multiple years. This is who we are. This is how things are. And it was like, it was not true. Yeah. It's not a lie that I was the oldest of 12 kids. It's not a lie that we were doing this dance or singing that song. That part wasn't the lie, but we're all happy. You can do this too. We are blessed by God. Like, all of those things were just really not the truth of the situation. And so there was a moral kind of question of like, when you have something that's on the record, however that got there, it's there. And it will live forever on the internet. There's like, do I want me talking about how great my dad is in People magazine to be the thing that's on the record? you know.
So when you say moral thing, do you mean a moral obligation to reset that story, or is that what you mean?
That is part of it. Is like a character question about like, and then, but that's also a very tall order. It's like I have to confront the lie that I was a part of, and that was so long and that was so loud, and that's very intimidating. And then it's like, that was the happy version of the story, and the untrue, like, who even wants to hear the worst thing? And then the question of like, how does one do that? Still, I guess, a moral question. How does one do that without then speaking for other people, whether it was my family or this or that? And at the end of the day, there was no path where I kind of never had, you know, could go the rest of my life and not, basically at any point someone could come up and be like, I heard this about your dad, or I never knew when it was going to come at me. And so was there anything that I wanted to do to kind of take action and lean into making a statement, or, you know. So I initially did a blog post, and then worked towards a book, worked towards an album, and each of those things kind of came at the time where like that's what I was willing and able and ready to do. The book, in some ways, I thought a lot about the times where I didn't speak leading up to, you know, talking this much about my story. And even at my dad's sentencing, there was an opportunity to speak, and it still just felt like, well, what even is it that I would say? And so it took a lot of time, a lot of processing to say, I have something to say. It feels important. It feels like there could be some hard things that follow from speaking, but also there's a lot of reasons why this is the right thing for me to do, and to just kind of open-handed say, this is what's right for me. I had some support, but I also had some people that would have been a lot happier if we weren't talking about it. So, you know, just really tried to consider all of those things. And yeah, the story's not done. Like, I'm still living my life. My family's still living their life. We're living our own lives. You know, like, my story is not my sister's story, and vice versa, and through the family. And yeah, I mean, it really is, it's a lifelong thing, though. So, and here I am. I thought maybe I'll never talk about this again. And really what it's done is it's opened the door for me to continue to learn more stuff about my own story, learn more about other people's story, and to see my story not just as one individual thing, but in the context of all these broader patterns and systems and things like that. And it builds community. I think it can be a part of change, and I get really, really inspired by seeing what other people do with their lives now that they're kind of living in a powerful place of using this and, you know, incorporating this. And so I kind of I'm always inspired by that. Like yourself.
I love that part. Well, for both of you, really. But I think that is so beautiful and so meaningful, especially for you being in the public eye, like having that attention and coming back and being like, I'm taking the power back. I'm in control. Like, this is my own story. This is maybe what you saw or you thought, but here's what was really happening behind the scenes. And then you saying, like, this is my story, but my siblings still have their own story.
Yeah. And the stories are going on. And I think that even, you know, a decade or two ago, if you weren't on reality television, you didn't have as much of that question or possibility in your life. But now with, like, the internet, with social media, with all, you know, almost anyone could be dealing with the idea of what's the outward picture, what's the shiny version, how do you have privacy when you're going through hard things, how do you navigate that in or out of the public eye? And I just find that I think it makes healing harder, and like, there's a lot of wonderful tools to raise awareness, to connect with people. I love that. But the dark side of, like, you know, whether it be the press, different things that come out when stories are kind of taken away from someone, and they don't even have the consent to, you know, that's another way that just another challenge to deal with. So I'm kind of like, if I could not be on social media, sometimes I'm like, I'm just gonna go get offline, and because it feels like healthier as, like, a human being. I don't know that we're supposed to have all this information, have all, you know, oof. Could be so overwhelming at times.
That is such a great point, though. I think, like, when you said the story gets away from someone, it oftentimes, like, going back to what you guys were both saying about, like, responsible storytelling of true crime or survivors, I think that's such a great point, because when it does get taken away, it exploits that person's voice and their story and can warp it.
Yeah.
And do a lot of the same damage sometimes that the abused, with stealing their voice, right? And their power and their control of that narrative and their own.
It can be.
Yeah.
It can be. Yeah, so I think that was a big part of me choosing to like speak more, so that I could kind of balance that out some. And one of the early things that I did as well is one of the first things that I said yes to, that was me sharing my story, was I got called by the TBI, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and they were training their agents. And I found out, like, it's not much time that they dedicate to just, like, working on child sex crimes. And I was like, if I can make an impact there, I want to do that. And I've done it a few times now. Hopefully, like, it's something that I can get better at, just to be more and more effective. But I remember one of the first times I did it, there was this, like, I don't know, he just, like, looked like, that's a cop, or that's an, you know, that's one of the guys you want on your team, like, you know, strong, whatever. And he just, like, raised his hand at the end of talking and questions, and he was like, why didn't you leave? And I was like, oh no, I need more time with you, you know. And we were so lucky. I think the agents that worked on our case were quick moving, they were well educated, they made good decisions in the case, and there's so many other ways that it could have gone. And I just think that more and more as I learn more and more. But, you know, having people that are educated in these areas is really important to help, you know, everyone in general, the public, but especially the helpers, whether it's the lawyers or the advocates or the, you know, agents or the, you know, social workers and things like that, because these things happen everywhere. They're happening all the time in their various ways. And just wanting to see the literacy and the understanding go up, and realizing that there's my book and my story can go places that I can't physically go. Like, let the story have as much value as possible.
Absolutely.
And just jumping in for a second, just on one thing that you said, when you said the cop asked you, well, why didn't you leave? I just want to jump in and say to all of the audience, if you have a question and it starts with the words, why didn't you? The right thing to do would be to not ask it.
Agreed. This is very true. Yeah, I just, or you know, like, you should have, or shouldn't, you know, like, this idea that so many times in life, I think, when we're in a judgmental space where we're going, hey, let me tell you what you should have done, like, how much time do we spend actually, like, looking through that person's eyes, or standing in their shoes, or, you know, empathizing? We were talking earlier, Heather, you were saying, can't remember what exactly the words you were using, but sometimes I'll tell people, like, no, it's not just, oh no, this bad person is hurting you, why don't you run? It's, but what if it was your dad? Not the way you see my dad, because you see him as like a monster. Your dad.
Yeah.
What if your dad was doing these things? And assuming you love your dad, or, like, you know, it's a relationship of trust. And even if they've broken that trust and they've hurt you, and so all those things are climbing together, like, at the end of the day, it's still your parent, for example, in my case. And so there's a lot of different answers to the why didn't you leave. Don't ask that question. But there's so many answers to it, and we're still working through those things, and that's where having a 5-second soundbite is so unhelpful, and doing a quick, shocking, you know, expose misses the heart of the thing, because, you know, it can end up being misinformation instead of informative. And for me, it was like, you know, the guy got pinned and had to, like, cut off his own arm to get out?
Yes.
It's like, that's what, unless you've gotten to the point where you can't even see it as your father, your friend, your coach, whoever it is, assuming this is a trusted relationship in which this is happening, or that's what's being used, a pastor or whatever, you have to let go of the hope that person, like, basically, there was still a little girl inside of me, like, one day I'll be able to have a dad who isn't dangerous, who loves me, who, like, because I'm the one holding on to that in my head. and that's part of what's keeping me there.
But you've been conditioned to do that also, right? And you're naturally dependent as a child.
You're dependent, and I think that it's right in that vulnerable spot, because like at some point, if you can let that go, that can lose its power. But like, we're all born with, like, ideally we bond to our caregivers. So like, I was loved enough, or I was led to believe I was loved enough to stay to try to make that happen. And I didn't have the experience of like, I never loved my dad. It was like, I remember going back and writing my book, and I had written quite a bit, and I was trying to make sure that I was being as honest as possible. And I remember having to go back and adding, I was like describing being really young and like playing with my dad. And I remember distinctly having to go back and put in, and I loved him. Like, he hung the moon for my early childhood. I wanted to make him proud. I wanted to, and yeah, he was already spanking me. He was already abusing me. There was things going on, but I was much more trusting. And like, that's the continuation of that, and the slow death of that brought me all the way to my early 20s. And so it wasn't just, I knew I was in pain. I knew I was like, if I stay, I'm going to die. But can that be enough to make me walk out the door and give up on the idea that my dad will ever not be the way he is right now?
I think what's so powerful, and what I've learned with, therapy and a lot of education and a lot of support and a lot of smart people that I surround myself with, is that part of your story, both things can be true at the same time.
Oh, I'm such a fan of that phrase. Like, more than one thing can be true at the same time. Yeah. And this isn't to get into like a debate of like theological, like, non-absolutism. But there are so many things that can be true at the same time. You can be happy, you can be sad, you can be terrified, you can feel like this is where you need to stay, and like all of those things.
Yeah. You love your dad, he can be breaking your heart.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I almost had to get to the point where it was like, this is not my dad. Like, he will never not be my dad, but he is first and foremost the dangerous person and your longtime abuser. And it's like, oh, both things are true, but the one has been denied all this time. And when we accept that one, it changes everything. Like, that's really that tipping point. Yeah.
Do you feel like all of your experiences, I mean, I know you this is probably a redundant question. I mean, you've written a book and you came out with your album, but do you feel like your experiences from your childhood and your family affect your music even today? And do you feel like it's allowed you to maybe tap into a depth of emotion that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise?
I would say yes to that. I also think I was drawn, I've thought about this actually a lot lately, is, that question of nature and nurture. And when you have such traumatic things going back, and indications that there were things even before you can remember, and realizing that, the world didn't start when you were born. There was what your parents went through, and their, and the generations and all that accumulatively. I've thought recently, like, I was drawn to learning. I have a very strong learner part. I loved reading, and I think I was trying to make sense of a confusing, abusive early childhood. And so I was always looking for that puzzle piece that was going to explain the thing that I'd been through. I was going to find the word to explain it. I was going to find the, justification for it or whatever. And so, I don't know that I can really separate out, like, I don't know who in the world I would be if I didn't have those experiences. And to me, I'm in this like delicate balance of, I've seen people go really far to like basically thanking their abuser or
the
their
trauma
abuser,
that
like,
happened to them.
My thing is, you can live a very interesting, creative, productive life and not, I don't think like you have to be beaten to be a hard worker. I don't think you have to be traumatized to be a resilient person. I think you actually have to fight the odds the whole rest of your life to like not have that be a net negative in your life. If those are like really extreme traumas that you've been through, you're going to struggle. Not to say that there can't be thriving and resilience and meaning, but the first point is moot. I can't change what happened to me. I really do think now that so much of being drawn to music, being drawn to writing, all of that is part and parcel of just how I reacted to, and it was a survival mechanism ultimately. It was a way of making sense of my world, as a way of just kind of navigating, here's what I'm going to need to do to, whether it was be loved or be seen or be heard or make sense of things. And so now if I want to not be just, controlled and driven by a trauma response or survival response, it is so core still to who I am that I fully embrace, like, I'm a writer, I'm a musician, I am these things, because I think they are wonderful tools for having a rich life, having a balanced life, having a healthy life. And I think if you can, engage with them in a healthy way, you can have a lot of power for good and for, doing it on purpose, I guess, now. I remember being at a intensive trauma retreat thing that I was doing, and they were talking about medicators, like things that we kind of consume or do to like not feel. And it's interesting that it doesn't just have to be like medication or drugs or like a bad substance. It can be lots of good things that we over exercise, or like, intimacy, but in a way that's like really out of hand, whether it's like an addiction or a sexual issue, or even like religion and like bypass, just like what is it that we do to like not think, not feel our feelings, not, just avoid things. And that being what we mean by medicators versus things that are healthy therapeutic expressions. And I remember thinking, like, which one is music? Is like music toxic for me? Is it bad? And she kind of was like, look, here's, the group leader was like, are you doing it to avoid or to feel? Are you doing it to process or to, and I was like, oh, it's always been about processing, feeling, being truthful, working through it. I'm feeling connected. And it was like very clear that this was probably a life-saving thing for me. Because I didn't have therapy growing up, but I had music. So that's what I used, that's
as an outlet.
Yeah.
So interesting.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm
do it.
going to. But would you sing for us?
Oh, I'm going to sing something?
Yeah.
I could. What are we, do I get any prompt? Do we want something of mine or something traditional? I wrote a song called My History that was really big for me because I had written, I'd used that tool kind of just instinctively for years growing up. And when I was getting out of my family, that was a really tough time for me in music because I would go to sing on stage and I would cry. It was too overwhelming. It was like, music moves us, music tells stories, and there was just too much going on. It was so fragile. And I also didn't write for a number of years, write songs and different things, because it felt like whatever was going to come up was going to be too much. Like, I couldn't handle that level of truth or that level of exposure and vulnerability. But eventually getting to where I am doing music, the writing came back first. And I wrote a song called My History that, really was just trying to balance out that truth. And I was marking a moment in my therapeutic journey where it felt like I had crossed over from, this all feels so big, I'll never be able to survive this, this will dominate me forever, and it's just so out of control. And it was starting to shift to like, this is something that happened to you, one of the many things that happened to you. And it's not, I was getting all this wonderful vocabulary, like, it's not your biology, it's part of your biography, and just like starting to put that kind of in its place. And so that chorus goes, all my story now belongs to me. I will try to build a better life for me. No one else will know what I could see. I am my survivor, and you will be my history. And, I think looking back on it, I wasn't necessarily thinking that in the moment, but the you is specifically my dad. It's trauma. It's the whole experience, and it's really for anyone, and for me going forward, the thing that I encounter that feels insurmountable. I'm really excited musically. So for me, the work goes on and the art keeps coming. It comes in waves, and it comes in so many forms. I started writing another nonfiction like memoir, and like had just committed to it, and then like chickened out and was like, I can't, the work is still being done. I can't go forward with this, and started cheating on that book with a novel, which has become my main writing endeavor. I'm about a third or halfway through. It's challenging in a totally different way. It's so much fun. Half the time I think it's the best thing in the world, and the other half I'm like, no one's ever gonna read this. This is so bad.
I'll read it.
Yeah,
and then,
we both will.
I don't know. I have a new album that I'm working towards to come in the spring. There's a song on that album that I'm really excited to get out, probably come out in the early new year, but it's called Honest. And that chorus goes, 1 step, 2 step, 3 would be another. Then I find myself right back where we began. Oh, one day, someday, maybe we'll recover. Until then, I'll be as honest as I can. You're out there talking about resiliency and survival, and like there are still so many hard days. And so trying to be honest about things are good, they're still hard.
Yeah.
And every day is different, and like just embracing that idea that it isn't a straight line.
Yeah.
Like there are cycles to things, there are new challenges in life, and I do feel like I have more tools now, and I'm in a healthy place, and yet darn if it doesn't, just it's like here we are again. I have to learn a whole new thing, something else to deal with. And so just kind of making that a way of life, and being public and having conversations and stating what I feel and where I'm at, while still saying ...
Yeah. More to come. It's a journey.
I think it's amazing. I think you're incredible. I mean, not just like incredibly talented, but like you're an incredible person, and you're kind.
Thank you.
And you're lovely, and what a gift you are giving to the world of yourself, like sharing your story in book, in music, in podcast, really opening yourself up to be vulnerable, because it is hard. It's hard.
You know,
like
it is, yeah.
I've been speaking for 20 plus years. It's still hard. Like it's exhausting. It's emotionally draining.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Go ahead.
So I started using this phrase recently. It's like trauma roulette, because I feel like I'm more practiced than ever, if you will, about like, I'm going to share my story. I'm going to sing this song that like might make me cry, but I've sung it 100 times now. But it just like, you never know what the thing is. Is it a person? Is it a smell? Is it what about the environment that it just like hits so hard? I don't know. Do you feel like over time it has gotten easier to like share of your story, or does it just kind of like pop up and get you every once in a while? I don't know.
I feel pretty confident in sharing my story today. Every now and then, like if my mom is in the audience, or if my dad's in the audience, then that'll get me.
Yeah.
But actually, I would say that probably the hardest part is not even me needing to share, is not me actually sharing my story part. It's the part that comes after, where I just have so many people coming up to me and sharing their stories with me. And of course I want to help them. Of course I want to be there for them. Of course there's so many things I want to be, but again, I am one person, and I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I mean, I have my experience. Yes, I have been there and I've experienced it, but I'm not God. And I don't have like the perfect healing formula, and I think a lot of people want me to give that to them, and I don't have it.
I can super resonate with that, and I think that I have gotten a little bit better at, I don't want my default to get through my daily life is dissociate, compartmentalize, shut it down. At times when you're doing something, you're choosing to do it, there's meaning behind it, there's intention, it can still be overwhelming. So like we can use those tools. We can be like, all right, I'm going to try to have a boundary here. I'm going to try to like, whether it's tune out or whatever you need to do like to get through that moment. I do find that I also am pretty dedicated to like, I want to hear the story. I want to stay open. I don't want to be closed off to this. I want to be affected by this so that it will then keep me motivated, keep me involved. But I have done, you know, a lot of events even recently or over this year or two where it's like if I sit there and watch the video earlier in the event that's talking about all the children that are coming in for medical examinations or rape, and that's really what the opening up of, you know, because we never want to diminish our stories. Comparison is not helpful, and yet there's something about the ability to be shocked is like still there. It is very fresh. It's not like you can't scare me, you can't hurt me. It's like, wow, this hurts every time I hear it. You know, someone else's story, a child's story, a survivor's story, and you want to honor that, you want to hold space for it, but capacity is a real thing.
Yeah.
And it's a lot. I'll have like, sometimes even the event will go well, but then for like 2 days, I will physically be dealing, like, and I just have to tell myself like, this is okay, this is natural.
Yeah.
It makes sense that you would have this reaction, and it takes a very physical toll sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You asked the great question earlier, kind of about, I'm paraphrasing your words, but
sorry if I missed.
But if no. This is an addition too, so
Okay.
You didn't miss anything. But you basically asked a question, I'm paraphrasing, around did those experiences that she had, does that guide her music and her writing? I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. And you answered, which was great. And the way that you answered was fantastic, because you kind of said that did, it sounded like you were saying that was a big part of your healing journey, which I think is great, because there are trauma therapies like narrative exposure therapy as an example. It's all about like writing down the trauma, writing down that. So you kind of mentioned that you were writing down the things that happened, maybe as the memories and stuff were coming to you, and then how you've always used music as an outlet. But I just want to give you an opportunity to add, if there's anything that you want to add that was really helpful about your healing journey, or like that you're still in process of today.
I did kind of take that in the direction of like, what's the connection between the trauma and the art, and
which is great. Yeah.
And not that I don't think those things, but I do tend to think I can tell you hold that all in your head, and you're like making edits as you go along, which is very impressive. That, yes, I have found it extremely healing to have like the tool of making art in my toolbox. And I get really excited because a lot of that I feel like is very accessible. So I encourage so many other people, like if you can pick up a pen, maybe it's writing, keeping a journal, writing down your experiences. There's some very interesting studies about like taking the hardest thing that you've been through and just writing it down and like doing that. It's almost like doing emotional exposure therapy, and it can do a lot and like lessening that. I think for me, I feel very thankful and happy that people have been receptive to hearing my story, not just when it's vomiting out or when it's in a talk, but also, you know, this music and the art that I make is extremely personal to me.
Yeah.
So if someone doesn't like it, it's kind of like, okay, maybe that hurts a little more than normal, but it's like we find our people, we find what works for us, and, you know, to kind of wrap your head around, like, you know, I've written a song that someone else heard, and then they came up and they told me like, I reported my dad because I heard that song. And it's like so hard and so rewarding and helpful to hear that all at the same time. So I think I will always have the instinct to use art as part of processing and healing, and highly recommend anyone else for trying it, because it just really, you're right, there's a reason why we have music therapy, dance therapy, you know, all those things. And I think it's so funny when people think, it's like, I think therapy, the word, is like food, the word. Like what cuisine we're talking about. Like there's all sorts of different recipes. There's all sorts of different modalities. And I do think that that idea that music kind of transcends language and all, like I really believe that. I really think it's a uniquely powerful tool. So a lot of times where I'm going to speak or share my story, I put some music in there.
Yeah. Like we put you on the spot today. And we were like, give us some of your music.
Yeah. So I have a memoir out called Unspeakable: Surviving My Childhood and Finding My Voice. And that was kind of the one that we were referencing as we were talking. And then right around that same time, I had put out an album called Brand New Day. And each song on that record just kind of explores the idea of starting over or having like a new start through my experience. And some of them are more kind of on the nose than others. But I really feel like every day has the chance for new beginnings and everything. But we also never get a blank slate in life. So it's like the balance of those two things. Mm-hmm. And I'm working on a TBD, very mysterious novel that we're not really talking about what it is, but it is definitely a mixture of my own life and story is mixed in there, but it's a novelization and a reimagining and kind of like a what if slightly different scenario. So that's very exciting. No idea when that will be coming out in the world.
But stay tuned.
But stay tuned. Send me all the good writing vibes. And a new album. The name right now, the plan is that it's called Bloom. And there's a lot of like nature analogies and just growth and healing is kind of the overall theme there. And very excited about that. Most of that is recorded, so that is underway. So keep an eye out for Bloom in the spring, as
Wonderful.
It should be.
Which is perfectly timed. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sure that
I've been very adamant about.
Wasn't purposeful at all.
Doesn't really make sense bringing it out right now. But I do have some Christmas songs that are out for us to enjoy over the holiday season if you're into that.
Perfect. So, definitely.
Interesting.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much. You're incredible and amazing, and I've loved every second. And I could sit here and listen to you all night.
Not scary and not dramatic. This is very like affirming and encouraging. Thank you for just sharing the platform that you have, and just it's encouraging and inspiring to see the path that you've taken, and so thank you for just kind of letting me be a little part of that here today.
That's it for today's episode of Smart Talks. Thank you so much for joining us as we dive into these important conversations about creating a safer, more compassionate world. Remember, sexual violence affects so many, but together we can make a difference by raising awareness, supporting survivors, and advocating for change. If today's episode resonated with you, or if you know someone who would benefit from hearing this, please share it with them. Let's keep the conversation going because every voice matters. You can find more resources and ways to get involved on our website at elizabethsmartfoundation.org. And if you're able, consider making a donation to help us continue our work to end sexual violence and support survivors. Every contribution, big or small, makes a huge difference. And we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on social media. You'll find us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and TikTok. Leave us a review from wherever you're listening. Your feedback helps us to improve and reach even more people. Thanks again for being here, and until next time, remember that each voice can spark change, and together we can make the world a safer place for everyone.